So it's so nice to be with you all again. And I say this sincerely, I can feel how pleased Master is that his teachings are being brought to his children in India. You know, he left this remarkable country for 32 years, returning only once. And I'm sure it wasn't easy for him to be in the materialistic West, but he didn't forget all of his children here. So Master had so many remarkable statements, but one I think that's very applicable to our discussion tonight about attitude is he said, positive, happy attitudes make us more receptive to bliss, whereas negative ones estrange us from bliss. And in a way, that could be the string that we could pick up this whole discussion about why right attitudes. Is it so that we have a better personality? Is it so that we're better liked? Is it so that we get ahead in the world? None of those things. Positive attitudes align us, make us more receptive to bliss, more receptive to God's presence. And that's why it's important, because there are, as Jyotish was saying, they're a reflection of a superconscious state. And so just as the techniques are important, all the techniques of meditation, as we talked about last week, without right attitude, we're only standing on one leg and there's not balance. But when you add right attitude, then, because most of our waking hours will be spent in interacting with the world of Maya. And by having right attitudes, we are able to live centered within ourselves in God. So positive, happy attitudes make us receptive to the state of bliss. Negative ones estrange us, separate us from bliss. And I'm sure you've all had this experience. I know I have. I'll get up from my meditation. I'll be feeling very happy, very uplifted, very close to God. And then you start going about your day, and then you get a phone call and someone says, "Did you know what happened at work? Do you know what she did?" And boom, where does your consciousness go? It's like the cable on the elevator gets cut and you go crashing to the bottom. And and then it takes a little while to realize what just happened. And it's just the negative thinking. So, let me get a sip of water. Excuse me. So the first attitude, we've been alluding to it, is just simply approaching life with a positive consciousness. And Master also says, once the poison of negativity takes hold of the ego, it drives out God awareness. That's a very powerful statement. The poison of negativity taking hold of the ego. And that's the beauty of being a devotee, because yes, you're going to get that phone call from the friend who's all upset. We can't avoid it unless you throw away your phone. But it doesn't have to get a hold of your ego. You don't have to get engaged with it. And that's why the repetitive effort to be positive in all circumstances creates a buffer between you and that pull, that dark downward pull that says, "Oh no, you can't be so happy all the time." We had a friend of mine who I knew some years ago. It was a beautiful story. I knew her about 15 years ago, but we've stayed in touch. And when we were close, she had a little daughter who was 2 daughters, but one was 4 years old. And then we were in town. This was in early or mid-January before we came back. And I just happened to see my friend, and next to her was this lovely young woman who was her then 4-year-old daughter. Now she's 19. And she said, "Can we come out to Anand and have lunch with you?" And I said, I thought it was just social. But I said, "Yes, of course." And then they came out, and the young girl, her name was Tara, she said, "Everything I've ever wanted in life is at Ananda." And I was shocked, and because I had no idea she was interested in spiritual things. She was just a little girl when I knew her. And I said, "Well, have you read Autobiography of a Yogi?" And she said, "Well, I keep trying to read it, finish it, but I'll read one chapter, and then I'll think, oh, there's so much more I didn't get in it, and I read it again, and I read it again." And I said, "Well, do you meditate?" She said, "Well, no one ever taught me, but I just kind of do it on my own." And then her mother said, she's all her life, she's just been so happy and so positive. And my husband kind of says, "What's wrong with you?" to the daughter. "Why are you always so positive?" And she said, "Please take her to the ashram." She said, "Because I can see that positive attitude is going to get destroyed by being in the world." So she came, and last I knew, she was so happy there and wants to stay in the ashram. But the ability to look at everything that happens and pick it up, and it takes effort, it takes willpower. It's much easier to be defeated. It's much easier to say, "Oh, I'll never get anywhere in meditation." But Master also said, he said it's very important, if you accept the thought that spiritually that you cannot reach your goal, then it's already a fact that it has happened. But if you say, "I will keep trying, maybe I'm not there yet, but I will have positive expectations about my ability to find success in the material world, to find answers," he said, then that too is already accomplished. So that positive expectation, we talked about it with regard to techniques, meditation techniques last week, but it's also in our daily life. If we can just say, maybe it's not so good now, but it'll get better. I remember once when Jyotish and I, Swamiji asked us to help start Ananda's work in Europe, in Italy, and so we went, and it was a very difficult assignment, you could say, because we didn't speak Italian, and it was just a very, very rudimentary work. And it took a lot of tapasya. Diana was there with us too. But I remember at a certain point, it was around Diwali, Christmas time, and we were we were isolated. All our friends and family were back in America. And I started feeling depressed. And I would wake up every morning and I would think, I'm not feeling happy. But you know what? It's been worse. I've been more unhappy at other times in my life. And then it kept going, and it kept going. And finally I woke up one morning and I said, I think I'm breaking new ground here. I don't think I've ever felt so bad. And then I thought, whoa, this negativity is getting a hold of you. You've got to fight back. So I went and found an old card that said joy, and I cut it out and I put it on the window. And for 3 weeks, because I could feel it was getting stronger than I was, the negativity. I used every bit of my conscious mind, my willpower, everything. I am happy. I am fine. I am happy to be doing the service that I've been given to do. And I just used all my energy, and I felt it started to get reversed. And then it went in the opposite direction, whereas before I thought, I'm breaking new ground here. I've never been so sad. I thought, I'm breaking new ground here. I've never been this consistently happy all the time. And it lasted even after I stopped working at it, it honestly lasted for many months. And so it's a choice. You can just say, I can let that force of negativity get hold of my ego. But what did Master say? It drives out God consciousness. Or I can say, no, if I want to experience bliss, I have to have positive, happy attitudes, because that makes me more receptive to bliss. And so in a way, it's very simple. And it's just a choice that we can make. And then the corollary attitude from that, really, there are two corollary attitudes. But one is gratitude. Just to say, whatever comes, whatever losses I have, I'm grateful for it because of the lessons that I'm learning from it. And when, many of you know that many years ago we had the forest fire that burnt down Ananda, and it was not an easy experience. But afterwards, Swami sent me a little note. Well, first of all, the first day he saw me, welcome, please come in. The first day Swamiji saw me after the fire, and we'd lost our home and all our belongings, everything, not just us personally, but the whole community. And Swami looked at me and he said, "How are you, Devi?" "Well, that's good." And he just kept walking. He didn't want me to say, "Well, it's pretty hard," he just... But then a few weeks later, he wrote me a little note, and because by then I'd kind of gotten my wits about me, and he wrote a little note, and he said, "I'm sorry for the loss that all of you had to endure, but always remember, what God gives, we take, and we take it with gratitude." And in fact, that experience was one of the greatest experiences of all of our lives in the Ananda community at that time, because we realized that our security, our happiness, our sense of well-being, none of that depended on outward things. If we didn't have it inside ourselves, no outward possessions were going to give it to us. And so you can't learn that lesson any other way by having it all torn away from you. And then you say, whoa, I'm still here. I'm still happy. I still have my guru. I still have Swamiji and my spiritual family. And it's really, so everything that happens when you think, God, why are you doing this? And again, gratitude affirms an awareness of God's bliss and his love, because you think, then you begin to understand everything that happens, even the worst things, are given to us with love from God, to teach us a lesson. And when we have the opposite attitude, resentment, why did this happen to me? Why me? Then it's like we're cutting off what God is trying to teach us and give us. We're saying, I know better. I know what's going to make me happy. I'll only be happy if I have all my possessions and all my house back. And if we thought that, we'd still be crying. But we thought, no, God, you took it all away, and there was a reason for it. And let me try to feel the reason, not react in the moment. And so everything that happens, to try to say, God, I trust you. That's what gratitude is about. Whatever happens, you say, I trust you, God. You know what you're doing better than I do. We heard a beautiful story from Anandamoy Ma. This was at the time of right after independence, when they were creating the partition between Pakistan and India, and some of Ma's disciples, who were had political position, came to her and said, Ma, can't you stop this? This is terrible. It's going to create so much suffering. It's going to ruin our country. And Ma said, let me think about this. And she withdrew and went into another room, a private room, and no doubt entered into a state of samadhi and felt God's will. And she came out very simply and said, don't you think he who created this world knows how to run it? And that's all she said. And the same with our own lives. God created our lives. He gave them to us. And we have to have the faith to say, thank you. I trust that everything that happens is part of your plan to bring me back to my home of union with thee. And so it just that consciousness, the attitude of being grateful, unites us with an awareness of God's presence. And it deepens our faith. If adverse things happen, if we say, oh, this foolish God, look what he made happen. How could he allow this to happen to me? I had two friends growing up as children, and we're still friends now. But one was, I think she was a yogi in another life, and the other was always kind of had self-pity. And the one who had self-pity had some health problems, and she had to have an operation when we were teenagers. And we went, my friend, the other friend who is, I think, a yogi in another life, we went to visit her in the hospital, and the girl with the operation was complaining, and she said, why me? Why did this have to happen to me? And my yogi friend said, why not you? And that wasn't the answer she wanted. But, you know, when we have that attitude of self-pity, then what's happening? Just as it said, the poison of negativity when it gets hold of the ego. Self-pity affirms the ego. It affirms our separation from the beneficence and the abundance and the grace of God that can always be coming into our life. And we're thinking, but why me? Why did this happen? Oh, this is too bad. I didn't get the raise, and he got the raise, and he ran into my car. And, you know, life, we can spend a whole lifetime feeling sorry for ourselves. We really could. I mean, why didn't our mother buy us that toy? You know, I remember once our son was small, and he had a little friend, and our son wanted this certain toy, and we just said, no, it was kind of an expensive toy. We said, no, we're not going to buy that for you. And then his little friend came over to play, and of course, he had that toy, you know, and our son kind of looked at us like, what kind of parents are you? But he learned. It's such a tendency, particularly in the materialistic West, to give your kids everything. And we didn't live that way. We lived very simply without a lot of material possessions. And our son has those values now. He appreciates simplicity. And now he's grown and has his own children, and he's raising them in that way too. So just to realize that we can go into self-pity or we can say thank you. Now, and I'll close with this, because there are so many attitudes that align us, as Jyotish was saying, with the consciousness of God. Remember in the chapter in autobiography, where Sri Yukteswar sees Babaji at the Kumbh Mela, and he's washing the disciples' feet and just washing them. And Sri Yukteswar says, what are you doing? He said, I'm by washing these sadhus' feet. They're not even disciples, just the sadhus' feet. And some of them were true sadhus, some of them weren't. But he said, by washing their feet, I'm expressing the quality most pleasing to God, humility. And so that was such a beautiful quality of Swamiji, because for all his greatness, for all his spiritual accomplishments, he never, ever put those to the forefront. It was, I don't have much to offer. He would often say before a big talk, and people would come out and they'd give a big introduction, he felt like a little mouse running out on the stage because he felt so insignificant. But without humility, it's like we're putting our ego before God. And God's the doer of everything. What can any of us do that's of any importance? But if we just say, God, I just want to be in tune with you. I'm nothing. Then that quality of humility, the attitude of humility. But the one I want to close with more is even-mindedness. Because whatever happens, if we can just say we remain centered in ourselves, as we said on Sunday night, the yogi should be able to stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. And our worlds will break around us one way or another. Loved ones will die. Jobs will be lost. Things we had been working for will not come through. The world will break around us. But if we can just say, I remain centered in myself. And why does that help us to advance spiritually? Because remember, hearkening back to Patanjali, his second Yoga Sutra, yoga is the neutralization of the vortices of feeling, of the reactive process. And so as long as we're in the reactive process and we give vent to it, we give energy to it, how can we achieve yoga? How can we achieve union with God, who is all stillness, all calmness, living in the ever-present now? And if it's like, oh, this happened, and I like this, and I don't like that, we're like on a little seesaw. We're just going up and down and up and down. But when we say, whatever happens, I don't need to react to act to it positively or negatively. I was talking with a very dear friend in America recently, and she said, all of a sudden I realized there's a part of my mind that thinks I need to have an opinion about everything. And I realized I don't. The world doesn't need my judgment on everything. It doesn't need my opinion on everything. And so just to look at life with equanimity. And I would watch Swami with people, wise or foolish, and he was the same with all of them. He didn't react. He didn't, I like you so much and I don't like you. He just, if someone was foolish, if they were egotistical, he didn't react. If they were humble and sincere and just harmonious with everyone, I knew those were the attitudes that pleased him, but he didn't react positively or negatively to anyone. Once we were with him, and I don't know why these thoughts started coming into my mind, but I was like wanting more personal attention, like notice me. And he picked up the thought and he came up to me and he said, Devi, no one is special to me. I'm not even special to me, because he had no ego. But just, we don't need to react. And the more we do, the more, and this is important. It's not that you're bad if you react. It's not that you're, anything like that. It's simply, it gets you out of alignment with the vibration of God consciousness. And that's the essence of all these right attitudes. The right attitudes help you go into a stream that makes it easier. So when you meditate, you actually go more deep. I tried this just a little bit. Meditate, take a pause, and then, not with depth, but think of something that upsets you, or a negative thought, and then try to go back to meditating. You can't do it. But then try the opposite. Be meditating, and then think of a beautiful thought you want to send to a friend or someone who's having a hard time. Then go back to meditate. You'll be able to go deeper. And so the attitudes we live our daily life with help us to go deeper. Speed in meditation, going deeper in meditation accelerates our spiritual growth. And the more our spiritual growth is accelerated, the easier it is to live in a constant state of positive, happy attitudes, which make us receptive, as our Guru said, to God's bliss. So we want to have you all have time to ask questions. Oh, no, first we're going to answer the questions from last week. And since I'm standing here, I'll answer the first one, and then you can answer the second two. So there were 3, and I'll do 1 and he'll do 2. So someone asked a question about, don't spiritual teachers adapt their teachings according to the people they're trying to reach, and therefore didn't Master Yoganandaji adapt his teachings for the West? And so do they need to be readapted as we present them here in India? Well, the simple answer is no and no. Because Master didn't change the teachings. What he was trying to do was to unite the consciousness of people ready to make a deep spiritual effort. East, West, India, America, Italy, it doesn't matter. The soul's path to God is the same. Master adapted it a bit for our age, for these times. So he presented it in a way that modern people could relate to. But the techniques themselves, he did not change. The underlying principles he taught did not change. And so, no, we don't need to reintroduce them in a new way back to India. We need to unite the consciousness of all truth seekers. And that's the beauty of his mission, because it dissolves cultural, religious, political boundaries and say we are all children under one Father, Mother, God. Try these techniques, try these teachings, and let us all move forward together. So that's the answer to one of last week's questions.
Then there were two questions about the mind and prana. One was essentially talking about still prana and dynamic prana, and dynamic prana has duality to it. Do the great masters like Babaji and Lahiri, do they have dynamic prana, or do they have duality in them, or unity? Well, the simple answer is that they have both. And we have both, except we only have access to the duality part of it. Our soul has the unity part, but the soul has become identified with the body and personality, which is the ego, and that has just this sense of duality to it. So if we can break that identity, then we have stillness, but we can also act. The other person asked about sometimes they're doing something and they feel essentially that the mind becomes still because they're serving or they're making some beautiful artistic thing, and the mind reaches a state of stillness. And is that the deep stillness of communion? And it isn't quite, but it's an approach to it. When we become focused and joyful, we become self-forgetful. But we haven't yet achieved the kind of stillness that really takes us out of ourselves. And the reason I have my little iPad here is because just this morning I received something from our work in Italy where Master is talking about stillness of consciousness. And so I thought I'd read it. I've also sent it to Dharmaraj and Dharmini. And so if you want to get it, they write them and they can send it to you. But this is from Master's original lessons called the Precepta Lessons. And he says, calmness of the heart, eyes, and breath is the sign that we have control over life force. Control of this life force means getting control of the force which binds you to the world. Without that training, you can never go into deep silence. It is useless to tell students to remain silent without their knowing first the methods by which they can control this life force. Holding the breath for a little while is all right because you oxygenate the system and purify your blood, but that is not control over your breath. Pranayama does not mean just holding the breath in the lungs. It means control of the heart. If you can control the heart, you can switch off the energy. Slowing down the heart is pranayama. If you know how to do this, then you can practice deep silence and kriya. Without that, you cannot know God. You must have control over your breath and life. So when we talk about, and he goes on, but I won't go on in this. So when we talk about achieving stillness, really that stillness implies at least the slowing down and interiorizing of the life force, slowing down of the heart and slowing down of the breath. ultimately bringing those to a state of rest, and that breaks the duality of the movement of energy in the Ira and the Pingala, allowing us to go into deeper states. So now we'll take a few questions, or some questions if you have them, and otherwise we'll be happy to. Okay, Prem.
How to avoid the thoughts that is opposite?
I couldn't quite hear the fan.
I was asking how to avoid thoughts that is those are negatives.
How to avoid negative thoughts? One of Master's most advanced woman disciple, Gyanamata, said this: you are not responsible for the first negative thought or the first restless thought that comes. That seems to come unbidden. So you can't avoid it, but you can avoid reacting and perpetuating it. So you have to train yourself that when something negative comes, as Devi was saying, a negative thought, that you don't then perpetuate that. And the best way is to counter it with the opposite energy. So if a thought comes, I don't know, any thought that comes, try to find, if it's a negative thought, try to find the positive opposite to that negative thought and concentrate on that. And I've long done this practice, because you can't necessarily, until the mind becomes completely clear, all those subterranean caverns are cleared out, you can't stop some thoughts that are not what you want from coming, but you can train yourself to react in a positive reaction.
And it's tricky because you want to be practical and realistic. So let's say someone's starting a project at work and you just think, oh, this is a stupid project, it'll never succeed. But is that helpful to have that thought? Once, in fact, in a similar situation, someone was going to start a new project at Ananda. And Swami asked us what we thought of it. And we said, well, we've tried this before, Swamiji, it never works. And he got very upset with us. And he said, you may know that, but that person doesn't know it. And by you kind of putting a negative thought out, she'll never learn the lesson she needs to learn by going through that whole experience. So it's an interesting, it's not a simple question, because we need to discriminate in the world. We need to use our minds and our rational and analytical processes. But then if you use them to such an extent that they paralyze you from moving forward, from being creative, from trying to be expansive, then the analytical mind is not helpful. And, you know, what Swami was able to accomplish in his life was, I think, a testimony to the power of possibility. Not saying, how in the world are we ever going to do this? You know, after the fire, for an example, when everything was gone and we had no insurance and, you know, how did we continue? Do you know what Swami's response was? He went on a nationwide tour called The Practice of Joy. And he just went to, 20, 30 different cities talking about the practice of joy and how to find joy in daily life. And from that, he drew, 40 or 50 new dedicated people who came and helped us rebuild the community and move there. And so it didn't seem like a rational response. Swami, we're living here in ashes. You're going out on a national tour?
I'm losing money doing it.
Yeah, right. But it's what rebuilt the community. So again, we have to balance those things of being practical and analytical, but that sometimes cuts off the world of possibilities.
I want to add just one little thought because it's important to this. If you meet negativity, negative thoughts with more negativity, and then say, I must not think that way, I must not, that represses it. So meet it with positivity and it transmutes it. Okay, Prasanna.
Even-mindedness. So, I wanted to ask a question. How to remain even-minded when a problem is going on? Because just this week and at work, it was like everything decided to go wrong one day, and I couldn't fix it. So I was very frustrated. So I knew I was going to be frustrated because I had to try to fix it during the same day. So I just listened to Master's talk and was still frustrated, but at least something was going on in here, and I was trying to work at it. But through the day, I could do nothing about it. I had to finally shut down and walk away home. And then the next day, the solution came. But throughout the day, I was kind of irritable. So how to be even during the
It's the question is, how do we maintain even-mindedness when we're faced with a difficulty? It's very hard. We just, sometimes all you can do is let time pass. Master sometimes said, the best solution is to go to sleep. Let the mind relax a little bit and wake up in the morning, as you did, and a new solution comes. In smaller, lighter ways, sometimes we can breathe our way through a problem. Often the mind can't think. It's like that which got us into the problem in the first place can't get us out of the problem. So the mind is running like this. It can't think its way out. So sometimes the best thing is a little deep breathing or some energization exercises, even a walk, anything to get a positive flow of energy going. And if you can get a positive flow of energy going, and if possible, set aside that which is upsetting you for a little while. Get a different mental image in. Even think of a beautiful experience. Anything like that will allow a little bit of space so that it winds down enough so that you can control it. But without that, it's very hard. There was
I was going to say share about Oliver Black.
Oh, I was going to share another one, but we'll share two. Haridas, who you know, had a great, one of those lines that will live forever in the memory of Ananda. So it was Valentine's Day, and a small group of us were out for a dinner. And after dinner, Roma looked at the menu and said, Haridas, do you want to share a dessert? And he said, that's a great idea. Let's share two. So this is how to achieve even-mindedness. And as I said, sometimes it just takes a little while and you have to let the energy pass. So we had a friend who was a very, very fine woman, and she was an artist, a professor at UC Berkeley, and a well-known artist. But she had a fiery temper and very, a lot of pitta in her. And one time she had something where she wanted to get a question answered. So she called up a friend of hers, and a good friend of hers, and she asked the question. He said, why do you call me at work with these kinds of things? You don't need to disturb my day. I'm not going to answer that now. And he just slammed the phone down. Well, this did not go well with Joan, who had a fiery temper. So she picked up the phone and she dialed it back.
So dial phones.
Yeah, dial phones. That's how old it was. And she dialed the phone and the line was busy. So she waited a minute, maybe couldn't even wait another minute, dialed again, line was still busy. Well, she was working on a painting, so she went back to the painting a little bit, and then she dialed 5 minutes later, she dialed him again. The line was busy. So then she went back to her painting and she forgot about it. And then later in the day, she thought, that's a very odd behavior for him. He's such a nice person. I wonder if something's wrong in his life. And she called him back and got him at this time. And she said, are you okay? You behaved rather strangely this morning. Is everything okay? And he started weeping. He said, I'm having such a hard time. You know, I'm having trouble at home. I'm having trouble at work. But see, that time in there allowed her energy to come from a negative direction to a positive direction. And that changed the whole possibility.
You know, I also want to, before we tell this other story, I wanted to share another really helpful thing in not reacting and being even-minded. And this is something Swami often spoke of, is to live in longer rhythms in life. So when we start getting frustrated or reactive, it's like the world feels very small. It's like time collapses in on us. But if you can just think, and this another story that just occurred to me when we were driving once with Swamiji, and the car, we hit an icy patch. We were going up into the mountains, and the car crashed into a bus that was parked along the side. No one was hurt, but the car was totaled. And then Swami looked up at the bus and he said, oh, well, that's going to where we're going. Let's just get on the bus. And so they called the tow truck and the car. But we just got our bags and got on the bus. And people were saying, oh, this is terrible. Look what's happened. And Swami, I was watching him. He wasn't fazed at all. And he just said, in a week, I would feel just fine about this. Why waste a whole week? And that's always the point. If the negative attitudes take hold of your ego in the moment, then it takes a long time to get out of it. But if in that moment you can just say, tomorrow I'm going to be able to solve this problem, let me just relax with it. And I don't want to ruin this whole day. And Swami also said when he would go to have dental work done, he wouldn't take Novocaine. And he said, yeah, I would feel the pain, but I thought, I don't need to react to it. And then he would just think about, so he said sometimes he would compose music or just think about, he said, I've had such a good life and so many wonderful things have happened in my life. Why let this little moment of pain define my experience? And so just try to think in terms like, this is going to pass, that there'll be a solution. And why get contracted into this little moment in time? Live in the bigger time, the eternal moment, because that's where God lives.
You can train the mind not to think about something. Think about that. But just because somebody is over in the corner making some noise, you don't have to pay attention to it. So you can train the mind not to think about something. Okay, one more question. We're having trouble with our time management here. We're already right.
I want to ask you about the blank-mindedness, when we're supposed to give some opinion on something and we are totally blank. And they give some time to give the opinion. Again, you're blank. So what to do, how to handle
How to handle the
opinion on
how to handle a situation when you're supposed to give a response or an opinion and you don't have any. Well,
First of all, that's a good thing.
yeah.
But we don't really have an opinion.
Right. Try to think of something that's complementary. And even if it's relatively neutral. We visited a business college in Pune last year or the year before. They wanted us to show the movie Finding Happiness, which we showed, and they loved it. But they had a beautiful practice there. Occasionally, the head of the school would gather all of the students. There were 350 of them, and they would have one student go to the stage, and one by one, every one of the students would go up and say 3 good things about that person. And so at the end of however long it took, that person might have 1,000 good, positive things said about him. And of course, it lifted the person, but it lifted the whole mood of the school. So if you don't have an opinion about, in a practical sense, think of 3 good things. Maybe it's, well, I'll give you a wonderful example. Sometimes people would always bring the babies to Swami to show him. And sometimes the baby was just not a very bright one or not good looking. And so Swami would never say, "Whoa, what is that?" He would say, "What an interesting baby."
No, he said, now that's a baby.
No, I think that was my line. I think he would say, "What an interesting baby." And so it was neutral, but neutral in a way that was positively neutral. So if you're asked for an opinion, think of 3 nice things and then at least say one of them.
But also, I assume you're talking about things at work, correct? Oh, okay, well, that's even better. Even better. Sometimes when people say, well, what do you think? If you're just using your mental faculties, you don't have an opinion. But try to feel, what does your heart feel? And that's often a truer gauge, the intuitive ability. So how do I feel? If someone said, well, do you want to, paint the walls yellow or green? What do you think? And then just think about, well, what would it feel like living in a room that's yellow? What would it feel like living in a room that's green? And just go more from your heart than from your mind. And then you usually, if you pause and do that, you'll say, oh, I do have a reaction to that. I do have a sense of what I would like. So don't let your mind get paralyzed, but just how do you feel about it?
But as people get calm, they have less, needs. So sometimes Devi and I will, she'll say, what do you want for dinner? Oh, anything. And it's hard to have an opinion, except to be positive. I like it all. So anything.
Then I'll suggest something that I know he doesn't like.
Steamed rutabaga.
And then he'll say, no, let's have this.
Okay, we're already 15 minutes over time, so
Thank you all.
thank you all.